hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. We're so excited to have Kim Harms here. She's gonna do a little introduction in a moment, but I found some things that I thought was pretty pertaining to some of the things Kim has been through, and then things that are really how our life turns out, which is how we make it, right? Challenges make you discover things about yourself that you never really knew. They are what make the instrument stretch, what makes you go beyond the norm. And that's by Cicely Tyson. And then we have yours, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience, which you must stop and look. I'm sorry, let me do that over again. I don't have my glasses on, so I'm having a little and let me make my friend here the co-host so we can, there we go. Okay, and this is by I'm gonna do it the easy way. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience which you must stop and look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." And I have always grown from my problems and challenges, from the things that don't work out. That's when I've really learned. And that's Carol Burnett. And I would say the same thing for myself. And I think most of us would say the same thing. So we are really excited to have our wonderful Kim Harms here today. Dr. Kimberly Harms has been around the block in life, I would say so. She has served as the commissioned officer in the United States Public Health Services, a dental school professor, a grief counselor, a death doula, a civil mediator, a clinical dentist with her late husband, Jim, in Farmington, Minnesota, a school board chair, president of an international women's organization, the first female president of the Minnesota Dental Association, congratulations, a national spokesperson for the American Dental Association for 21 years, an award-winning bestseller author, an international speaker on the topics of grief, conflict, and legacy planning. She has also suffered many personal losses, including the deaths by suicide of her mother and son, and the death of a broken heart of her husband after their son's death. Her most important role now is mother to her 2 surviving children and grandmother to 6 precious grandchildren. Kimberly, we are so thrilled that you are here, and we are so excited to hear about legacy and all you have to offer for us. So please take it away.
Well, thank you so much. It's just a privilege to be here. I was so excited. We talked a few months ago and we're just able to get that schedule going. So I'm just so glad to be here. It's just a privilege. So today we're going to talk about building an emotional life insurance plan for your loved ones. You know, we're here talking on the nest egg, and we like to take those little eggs that we're taking care of, all the things we're building up our little nest egg, and we carefully cultivate our nest egg with the hopes of setting our retirement up and our families up for success and happiness. But what we don't realize is that 57% of Americans have an argument around the death of a loved one. And most of the time, that conflict revolves around legacy planning and money. So we're setting up our nest egg and we're living through it as we live through it. But when we're gone, what happens? What happens? Sometimes that nest egg of ours will crack up our family. So don't let your nest egg crack your family's happiness. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Build up your nest egg, but don't forget about the emotional issues that are going on with your family or that may go on with your family. So we need to focus on building an emotional life insurance plan as well as our nest egg. And in order to do so, however, we really need to understand the generational expectations because they're very different. The number one reason for conflict is lack of a common understanding or violated expectations. And so often the problems that occur after we die, the problems that cause a conflict, are expectations that are not realized. And so we need to understand both groups to figure out how to get those expectations in check and minimize conflict. So what about the millennials, Generation X? What are they thinking about? What are they worried about? Well, 1/3 of them expect to take on a financial burden to support their parents. And I'm a baby boomer, so I'm saying support us, right? And almost 1/3 of them also are resentful that their parents have not done a better job in taking care of their financial shape. So all of us that have built up nest eggs, yay for us, because we're just helped alleviate those worries for our children. But one of the other things that the Generation X, especially the millennials too, they face some difficult economic challenges that we didn't really have to face. The main one is a high level of student debt. And they've also faced some economic recessions, which we have too. But that student debt and some of the other things that they're going through, housing and so on, is been more difficult than it was for my generation, for the baby boomers. But what about us baby boomers? Well, we are living longer than ever before. Heart attacks rates for young people are down, cancer deaths are down. And so we are living in a state of frailty for a longer period of time, which means we're going to need some help in taking care of ourselves. In fact, 55% of baby boomers will have mild to moderate long-term care needs, and 25%, a whole quarter of us, will have severe needs. And I think that kind of means nursing home needs or full-time care need, 24-hour care needs. And of course, that's something that puts a big strain on that nest egg that we built up. So what are the expectations of your family? My children tell me, Mom, we do not expect an inheritance. And in my generation, there was really not much of an inheritance, but my kids, they don't expect it. That's great. That's what we hope they say, because if there's no expectations, they're not going to be disappointed in us, right? And I also have to leave that statement with, that's what they tell me, that they don't expect anything. Now, I'm not sure if they really think that, but that's what they tell me. And I'm grateful that they tell me. Hopefully they're right on that. The next thing could be that the expectations of your children kind of match the expectations of the parents. That's a really pretty good place to be. Although expectations, as we know, because death comes unexpectedly, we don't know how much of that nest egg is going to be left when we're done. But at least we're kind of on the same page. The third category, and probably one of the most common, is that children have absolutely no idea of their parents' wishes. And that's because nobody likes to talk about death. I'm a death doula and I work with legacy planning, and nobody likes to talk about death. They're afraid to talk about death with their kids. And the kids don't want to talk about death with their parents, because if they talk about death, they feel that we're going to somehow take offense to that. And we've got to change that whole situation, because it's not very healthy. The fourth one are complicated family dynamics. And that occurs, for instance, many times in blended families. In fact, I have a friend of mine who just lost her brother-in-law. Her sister was taking care of him for over, they've been married for over 20 years. She's been taking care of him for more than 5 years with Alzheimer's. And they both had a child by a previous marriage. And their plans were that when one of them died, of course, the estate would go to the living part of the married couple. And then when the last part of the married couple died, then the assets would be divided up amongst the two children. Each member of the couple had a child by previous marriage. And that's what they thought was going to happen. In fact, they even talked to their family members about it, but they didn't do it in an official form. They talked to them about that casually. So what happens? The husband dies, the woman's in mourning, the wife is in mourning, and the stepdaughter says, oh, by the way, I'm my father's only heir, so I'm expecting his part of the inheritance, which is half of your assets, so please hand it over. And she is, of course, grieving the loss of her husband, but she's also grieving the potential loss of her grandchildren, because that stepdaughter had grandchildren, the only grandchildren that this woman had. So during her grieving process, she's trying to face all this. Now, if you start to take a look and do the math, you'll find that if the stepdaughter took half of the assets, not only would she have half of what she expected to have to live off of, but then her son would be negatively affected, because those assets would have diminished as she lived. So it's a big mess. She actually doesn't have to do any of it, but she is passing on a large portion of his assets onto the stepdaughter, because she's afraid to lose her grandchildren. So you have to really make sure things are done to prevent those types of things to happen. Okay, expectations of the children are different from the expectations of the parents, which is kind of goes along with that last example. And then finally, and this one is happening more and more, but nobody likes to talk about it, but there are some children that believe that the parents are using up their inheritance by living longer. And we have to really think about that. And it's true. I have friends who say, oh my gosh, that's what they think. Think about those of us that will end up, 1/4 of us will probably end up either in a nursing home or with full-time care, which is extremely expensive. And every month that goes by, that nest egg we built up is going down, 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 down in leaps and bounds as we're using it up with long-term care. Who wants to be in that situation and feel like, oh my gosh, my kids would prefer I just die now so that I'm not using up that money, right? It's a really bad place to live. But we are kind of rebelling against that thought. We are, generation, we baby boomers had a lot of revolt, revolted against the Vietnam War back in the 70s and 60s. And we're revolting now. Many of us are saying, well, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to spend all the kids' money. In fact, we're even going to go on a ski vacation. A ski vacation is spending my kids' inheritance vacation. And it's becoming a trend around the country. And it's really kind of fun. I mean, I would like to join these people going on this nice vacation. But I think that when we're talking about now building emotional health for your children, if you're going on a ski vacation, it's kind of fun to talk to your peers about it. But I really wouldn't talk to your children about. I'd kind of keep that, it's like a wink, wink with the rest of the generation. I wouldn't really go out in your face to your children, even if they tell you they expect no inheritance like mine. You don't really want to talk to them about it. But I think it's kind of funny that we're just kind of coming out there saying, hey, we're just going to spend it now so we don't have to worry about later. But that's kind of a trend that's taking on, but not a good trend when you're trying to build up the emotional health of your children. So one of the things, too, we need to take a look at what is the most important thing we can leave our children. Well, happiness, if you take a look at the 80-year Harvard happiness study, unbelievable. Look it up, Google it. It's just amazing. What they found was after an 80-year study, when they took people 80 years ago and interviewed them periodically again, and what they found out, overwhelmingly so, was that it's not money, it's not fame that gives you happiness, it's close relationships. So when we're talking about leaving an inheritance to our kids, if we can, the best thing we can do to help with their happiness is to leave them with close relationships and not have them fight with their siblings after you die. So one more reason to have that emotional part of the estate planning done. So what are the points of contention when somebody dies? Well, they're varied. Perceived unfairness, miscommunication, sibling rivalry, varying financial needs. Those are all things that people argue about after the death of a loved one, particularly, a mother or father or the last member of the couple. And so we have this cash clash, and the cash clash is between the boomers' retirement savings, our nest egg, versus the millennials' inheritance dreams. We're kind of tugging about back and forth about that. So what do we need to do? We need to hatch a plan. Let's hatch a plan to kind of prevent those problems from starting. So how do we mend the money divide? How do we mend that? Well, we need to have end-of-life discussions, serious ones, ones involving the entire family, where everybody knows what's going on. We also need to help foster self-reliance among millennials and Generation X to kind of just help them understand that they're responsible for taking care of themselves. They shouldn't really rely on an inheritance, particularly since we don't know if we're going to end up with long-term care needs, which might dwindle that inheritance amount down. And we also need to get our affairs in order. We need to get our wills, trust, healthcare directives, letters of intent, all of those things that we need to do to help with end-of-life planning and get it done and get it located in a place of easy access after we die. So let's talk about the end-of-life discussions. Those are very, very important to have. So the reason that they're important is because we are involved in it. And so all of the members of the family know that this is our plan, and they're not going to fight later on after we're gone, trying to figure out what we were really thinking and that there was no undue influence and all of those other things that get in the way of harmony after the death of someone that we love. So anyway, so with a family discussion, we need to really define those expectations, because remember, it's a break in expectations that causes conflict quite frequently. So we need to ask for, let's have a planning the future meeting instead of let's have a death talk, talk planning the future so that people will come to it. We need to prepare for a variety of responses. Some of our family members are going to want to come and talk about this, and some of our family members are going to say, absolutely not. I don't want to talk about your death. I don't want to think about your death. We can't do this, Mom. You bring them in, or you give them a chance, and then you record what's said. One thing to discuss is the healthcare directive. We'll go over that next. We'll discuss where your legacy binder is. I really recommend people put all their stuff in a binder, put in page protectors, and it have all of the things you need to have in it, your passwords, your will, your trust. You might have that in a separate place. Anything that you don't have in that binder, have a designation, have a part of that binder designating where those important documents are, the ones that are not in your binder. But I have my titles to my car, my birth certificate, my husband's death certificate, our marriage certificate, everything they might ever need is in that binder. So they don't have to go crawling through all my drawers trying to find everything. My husband used to have, for his filing cabinet, were plastic bags that look quite like garbage bags. So many important documents were in these plastic bags that we had to go through before he passed away. Luckily, I had taken over most of the jobs during that time, so I didn't have to really find very much. But sometimes we don't have a very good filing system. So have it all in one place and make sure they know where that binder is located. And what happens when one parent dies and when one is still living? That would really have helped if you had an official documented discussion. My friend with the stepdaughter wanting to take all the assets, that would have helped in that situation. Also, if there's something unusual, it needs to be shared and you need to be discussed. For instance, if you have a child that might have special needs, that might have to, maybe in order to support that child, you may need a larger percentage of the assets going to that child after you die. Those things need to be discussed. If someone's taking care of you and you've made an arrangement that, okay, if you take care of me, then you get a proportion of my assets when I die, you need to discuss that and document it so everybody knows afterwards. And again, you put the discussion either in writing, or I think better yet, just take your phone, click it on audio, take an audio recording of it. And when the audio recording is done, send it to everybody so that everybody has a recording of it. So if something happens, you know exactly what was said. And because people have memory, the interesting thing is people remember things differently. And so you really need to have documentation of this. It's not always that they're lying or they're trying to cheat. Sometimes they just remember things differently. So if you have the discussion and it's documented and you can hear the recording, then that really is helpful after we die. Also, please write a will. Protect your family, but in your will, make sure you don't try to predict the future in your will. Try to make things as even as they can be right then. In this particular case, this is a picture of my husband's family. My husband, Jim, he was one of 14 children. He was number 12. And Sonia over there on the right, when she wrote her will, she had no children and she wanted to leave something. It was a small amount, but something to every one of her brothers and sisters. And she didn't want it to pass on to the next generation. So she figured out that two of her, one brother, one sister, would probably die before she did. So she figured that out. They had some health problems and she didn't at the time. So she figured that out and she left the same amount to everybody in the family, excluding these two that were supposed to be dead by the time she died, right? So anyway, as you might guess, they weren't dead when she died. And so when the will was read, luckily the middle sister Judy was the executor. She called everybody in the family and says, oh my gosh, she left out Paul and she left out Mary. And what are we going to do? And the family just decided to divide it up amongst 13 brothers and sisters rather than 11. And that was, part of that was because it was a close family. The other part was because it was really a small amount. It wasn't going to make a big difference to do that. But what if that had been a large amount? There might be, all it takes is one or two people to say, no, we're not going to do that. And you can cause some real big problems. So don't try to predict the future when you're writing your will. Try to keep things even as they are right now. And it's, of course, important to remember, as we all know, that the cost for attorney fees to write your will is a fraction of the cost for attorney fees if someone's going to challenge your estate. So if you don't want the attorneys to get all of your assets when you're gone, then make sure you get that will written. And keep all information in one place: your important contacts, healthcare directive, your last will and testament, personal information, important documents. Keep all those in one place. Again, I have a binder, and I think that's the best place to keep them for me and for my family. So let's talk about healthcare directive. What about healthcare directive? What about the end of life choices? My husband, when he was dying, when he knew he was dying, he had written a wonderful healthcare directive. He was helped to do that by some nurses. It wasn't a family member. It was a third party, which I think is good. And he decided he did not want to die in a hospital. He wanted to die at home. So he had that clearly written at the end of his life. And I was so grateful for that, because when those things happen, I didn't have to worry that I was doing the wrong thing. It's one of the most sacred jobs you can have, to help someone at the end of their lives. And I didn't have to worry that that I was doing something that shouldn't be done, because he was the one that directed it. And so it's a really big gift to your family to write a very clear healthcare directive, and make sure it's your choice, by having this in place. And we talk about, how do we manage our care? There's several ways you can do that. Some people want to do everything possible, and that's a valid choice. They want to do everything possible, and typically that's done in a hospital. And you have to decide, do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want to just have palliative or comfort care? Palliative care is comfort care with may or may not have a curative intent, which means that you might be doing some things that we hope will result in a cure, but typically it's done to keep you comfortable. And then, of course, hospice care means that you're expected to have a prognosis of 6 months or less, and there is no curative result. It's just to keep you comfortable. And that's what my husband did, and that worked out very, very well. He had a very peaceful death. So one other thing I recommend is that you write legacy letters or legacy love letters to your families. And what those are there letters that you write. I've written one to every one of my family members. You tell them how much you love them. You can pass advice down for their future. You can also write special letters for when they graduate, perhaps when they get married, when they have children. You might want to keep them in a special spot that the executor hands out, because maybe they don't graduate, maybe they don't get married, maybe they don't have children, and so you want those to be passed out only by if those things occur. You can share memories, beliefs, your values, and your history on these letters, and they're just something nice you can kind of speak beyond the grave to tell people how much you care about them. They can also be letters, videos, books, or all three. And we have a beautiful book of my husband that my daughter did. She recorded his history, and then she wrote it down in his words in a book and got pictures. It's absolutely a treasure for our family. So legacy letters and legacy love letters are great things to have around. So we're going to talk just a little bit now about building your legacy with the emotional health of your family in mind. So when you do that, you ensure that your loved ones are protected, your wishes are honored, and potential disputes are minimized. And again, that's a very big part of this, is to minimize potential disputes. So of course, the biggest legacy is to just tell people that you love them. They need to know that. They need to know they can be trusted. They need to know the value of hard work, and the value of encouragement. You need to pass those things down to your children. Also resilience. Our generation, the baby boomers, I think we've been through tough times. Our parents went through the Depression, so they've been through tough times. And over the years, as you get older, we become more resilient. We go through more things and we become more resilient. And that's a really critical factor. I lost my son, Eric. I had a beautiful, beautiful son, Eric. He was a student at Columbia University. He was recruited by Columbia University. He was a National Merit Scholar. He was a brilliant jazz pianist. And he was studying engineering. He was elected to student council at Columbia. Like what the heck? Who does that, right? And he came home after his first semester. We'd gotten on the dean's list. He was on cloud 9 and he was in love. And we were so happy for him. You're always happy when your kids are happy. He went back to school, and 2 weeks later, his girlfriend broke up with him. And that impulsive behavior of a jazz pianist that made him such a great jazz pianist, combined with that 19-year-old brain that wasn't fully developed. And he took his own life 45 minutes after his girlfriend broke up with him. And it completely destroyed our world. I just can't even tell you how horrible that was for the rest of the family. But he just wasn't resilient in that area. He didn't have much experience in that area. He wasn't old enough to know how that worked. And so one thing that I wish we had been able to do, to know ahead of time, is to build up resilience. That's a very important characteristic, because we're all going to go through tough times. This is one of the most difficult ones to talk about, because it's a legacy of shedding. No, the kids don't want our stuff. I built up as a baby boomer. I've been collecting my whole life thinking, oh, this is a treasure. My children are going to want this. And we'd spend a little extra money on things, and only to discover at this point in my life that our kids don't want anything, that very little of what I have do they want. In fact, before my husband died, we have a cabin with a big outbuilding to store the boats, and it was full of stuff from our former big house. And the kids told me, one of my children told me that my husband and I could not die until we had cleaned out that shed. Now, my husband did not listen to her, and passed away anyway. So that left it all up to me, right? So, but I have worked through that. In fact, we sold the cabin, which we didn't think ever was going to happen because we thought we'd pass that on to future generations. But the kids didn't really want to take care of the taxes and all the things that would be required if they kept it. So we sold our cabin, and we're getting rid of this stuff right now. I'm about halfway through that, and it's been a very freeing experience for me. But most importantly, it is showing my kids that I care about them, and I don't want them cleaning up my mess, cleaning up my stuff after I die. One other thing that I'm doing is I'm putting in my will money set aside specifically to manage the cleanup of my stuff. There are professional groups out there that'll just come in, take all the stuff, and dispose of it. And I'm going to pay them to do it so that my daughters don't have to haggle about who's responsible for that job. And so I would really recommend that to most of us to do that, because somebody always gets stuck with that job. And again, that's something that many times will cause disputes after you die. Also, telling our story is a great thing. To tell your story in a video or writing it down, your story and your history, absolutely valuable. And when you get your emotional affairs in order, one of the first things you need to do is take a look and see if you need to apologize to anybody, right? Say you're sorry to the people that you may have hurt in the past. Get those emotional affairs in order and do it now. It's better to do it sooner than later.
Okay.
One of the things that I learned, am I all done? Okay. Oh, no.
Well, we wanted to find out if anybody had some questions and start the Q&A.
Okay, we can.
Are you almost done?
Yes, this is just 2 more slides real quick.
Okie doke.
Okay. One of the things I just want to say is that the legacy of forgiveness is really important. In fact, I do a lot of work in Rwanda. Sorry, that had some noise on it, but I do a lot of work in Rwanda, and I learned in Rwanda, they learned after the genocide to seek justice, forgive, and then also to bring the people that had done the crimes after they served their sentence back into their communities. And the power of reconciliation is wonderful. And that country now is safe and a great place to live compared to some of the other countries around it. In fact, it has the same safety rating as Canada does. It's a safety level 1. It's a great place to go. So the country of Rwanda, we have 65 Eric Harms libraries there, has really shown the power of forgiveness and how important that is. And another thing about reconciling that's so incredible is that if you reconcile with the people that you love, because after they go, your grief will be far more complicated than it would be if you hadn't reconciled. And this is a picture of my husband, and he's here with his brother. That's his brother back there. He and his brother hadn't talked for about 10 years before they met this one day. So they reconciled the very last day of my husband's life. And not only did they do that, but they brought video, and they were talking about their life as before this, when they were getting together and their time together as brothers. So we want our family to thrive in a world without us. And we want to just remember that by gifting your children, not just your wealth, but the wisdom of your heart and the strength of your values with solid estate planning, you can set them up for a lifetime of happiness and security. And it really is a profound act of love. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was an amazing, amazing presentation. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Mary, it's good to see you. I have a couple questions, and one of them, and you keep talking about this legacy, giving your children the legacy, having, what is that? Why do people do that? Why do they set up a legacy for their kids? Didn't they bring their children up to stand on their own 2 feet? So could you talk a little bit about, I have no intention of leaving anything to anybody.
Well, yes, a legacy really is bringing them up to stand on their own 2 feet. That's a perfect example of that. But I think we need to realize that our legacy that we have is in every interaction we have with everybody that we have. And so I have, for instance, 6 grandchildren. So I'm trying to bring up those legacies that we talked about, the legacy of how to show encouragement, the legacy of love, the legacy of being independent, the legacy of hard work and saving money. And those are the important legacies that we generate every day of our lives and every interaction that we have. But I think we need to start to focus on it more, because we forget sometimes that those are the important legacies. We focus on the money, and sometimes we forget that money is a legacy. It certainly is a legacy that we think about, but we frequently don't think about the other legacies that we leave to our families.
Yeah, standing on your own 2 feet. That's a
Mhm.
huge legacy.
Yep.
I mean, isn't
Yeah,
that what
absolutely.
parents want? Don't they want their children to stand on their own 2 feet and then be able to pass that down to their children?
Absolutely. That's that legacy of hard work, and the legacy, all those legacies that we talked about are involved in helping kids stand on their own 2 feet. Yes, that's absolutely one that we pass along. So it's important for us to do that, especially as we're looking at these generational differences. We need to teach our children how to stand up on their own 2 feet and be independent.
So I wanted to bring up something that you brought up. I think it's called I don't know how to say the word, like philia,
Oh,
FILIAL.
Philium on life.
Yes, that is, you said something about the children. Now, people think that the children have to be responsible for taking care of the parents. It's actually a law in 23 states that the children must take care of their parents. So if the parents don't have either a good insurance policy in place, like a whole life policy, or long-term care, they're going to depend on their children if they didn't set themselves up. So there's another very important conversation to have with your children. And most people don't even know about it. I just read it in an article a couple months ago. Can you
That's
talk a
probably
little bit more about that and the communication between parents and their children?
Yeah, that's probably why a third of the millennials and Generation X are concerned about having to take care of their kids, of their parents, and also that resentment that their parents didn't take care of themselves. And so there's a resentment that's between both generations of we as baby boomers want our kids to be able to take care of themselves and not depend on us, right? And then at the same time, our kids are expecting us to be independent because they don't want to have to take care of us. So it's kind of balancing for both generations. Both generations want the other generation to be independent. And of course, when we build our nest egg, for me, that's why I'm building my nest egg. I want to be independent all the way through. I think that's the big challenge right now is between the two generations, each one of them wanting them to be independent. Or as a baby boomer, I don't want my kids to feel like they're dependent on my inheritance, so that they're, counting the days in the nursing home. And as a parent, as a millennial, I don't want my parents to spend all the money right now and then end up I have to take care of them at the end. So it
Oh,
goes
yeah.
for generations. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a big, huge difference. Oh, off on the ski trip. Oh,
Right, exactly.
I'm gonna spend your inheritance.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they call it their inheritance when
Yeah.
is that really what it is? Is that really somebody's inheritance, or is that your money to do what you want? You're retired, right?
Right, exactly. That again is that big rift, is that it's our money that, and because many of us are going to end up in a nursing home or with skilled labor, full 24-hour skilled labor to take care of us. If that happens to us, my grandmother was in the nursing home for 17 years, and so if I'm in the nursing home for a long time, I mean my money will be gone. And so we don't know what the inheritance is going to be. We don't know how much is going to be left because we don't know when we're going to die. And so if each generation can be independent, that's the ideal. So that's why I said, just, it might be fun to joke about that, but we really shouldn't be talking to our kids about that. For one thing, it's calling them their inheritance instead, this is my money to spend. But the other part is it's kind of an in your face, because what if they do go out and they spend all the money going on trips, going on vacation, and then the child has to take care of them for 17 years, or something like that. That certainly would cause resentment to the children. So trying to have this balanced plan is very, very important.
Understood. So I have a couple more questions. Does anyone else have any questions or any thoughts that they wanted to ask of Kim, especially if you have children and you're thinking about legacy? Okay, well, I do have a couple more questions. You were one of my friends is he's a wealth manager, and what he told me is not all the inheritors are equal, and they therefore should not receive equally. Like one of them has absolutely no interest in the business, and the other one takes over the business, which is a lot of work. And so the division is different. That would come under if that's not discussed, under violated expectations, right?
Absolutely. And the discussion is critically important. It's important to invite everyone. Now, some people might not come because they don't want to talk about death. Well, that's their decision, but record it so you know exactly what was said. Another thing that you can do that's very important is a letter of intent. And that means that along with your will, you just write a letter that tells your family, okay, I'm doing this because of this. I'm doing this because of this. I'm doing this because of this. The reason that's important is that if people find that out afterwards, if you're already gone and they find that out afterwards, that's where big time resentment starts to begin between siblings, because they're saying, well, you caused, you were an undue influence on my mother, or you did this, or you did that. And it also, sometimes, we have one member of the family takes care of us for a long period of time and spent their resources and money taking care of us for a long period of time. And if there is something left at the end, then perhaps they need to get a larger percentage than someone that didn't take care of us, So or if there is a special needs child, that's another example. So no, it's not always exactly the same. It's not always exactly looked upon as fair. But the reason that we need to document that before we die, so that there's no question that those were our wishes, and it was not some sort of manipulation done by the people afterwards, which is where people tend to assume that's what happened. If their expectations are violated, they may just assume that someone was putting undue pressure on us for this or for that. So a letter of intent and the discussion are all ways to kind of try to help. People are going to fight sometimes no matter what you do, right? But if you can do everything possible and have those in place before you die, you're going to diminish the conflict later.
Thank you very much for that. And then you brought up death. You brought it up quite a few times, and people are afraid of death. They're afraid. They're afraid of something that's going to happen, right? You have to pay your taxes, although many people don't, and you're going to die. And we don't like to face what they think is the bad thing. Is dying bad?
We're all going to die. I mean, no one's escaped it ever. And although there's some people that are trying right now, if you kind of look into some of the media, that they're thinking maybe if they do this or they do that, they're going to live forever. And but no, we're not. We're all going to die. It's just a fact. And I think coming to terms with that is very, very important in our lives. It's something that's going to happen. So just deny that it's going to happen is where people get into trouble. If you take, I know of many, many, many families where people are just in denial that they're going to die. And in fact, sometimes if someone has a prognosis, where death is considered imminent, their family still doesn't want to talk to them about death because they feel like they're giving up on them. And of course, that's a very important time to have the discussion. I have a friend who went through that. The wife was dying. She had a very serious illness. She was expected to die, but instead of having that discussion when they could have had it with the mom, they didn't. She just passed away, and her legacy, her estate planning was a mess because so many things were in her name and had to go through probate, and it costs a lot of money and time and money, and it was just a big mess. Well, they knew she was going to die. Why didn't they have her write a will? Why didn't they try to get this stuff done? But they didn't, because they felt that they were betraying her because they were admitting she was going to die. Well, she was going to die, as we all are, and we really need to get over that. We are a death denying culture in the U.S. In fact, we do. If you take a look online, everyone seems to assume that if you eat correctly and you exercise and you take the right pills and you do the right things, you can live forever. And but we just don't like to admit that death is coming. And I think it's a very, very important fact that we have to just come to terms with. And by getting all these things done when you're healthy, you don't have to worry about that when you're not. So if the woman that whose family was afraid of betraying her when she was dying, if she had gotten all that stuff together a long time ago, they wouldn't have to really feel that they were betraying her at that time. So it's better to do this stuff while you're healthy. If you're not healthy, then certainly get it done. But denying it really sets your family up for disaster in many cases by having all this stuff just left open.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, but let's have Jonna ask her question.
Yeah, Kim, thank you so much for bringing this. I think this is an important topic. And I think in line with this, there's another area is having a plan, and I'm speaking from a position of frustration, is to have a plan for triggers, like when you can't live in your home anymore by yourself. What's that trigger before it happens, right? Because when it happens, it's so emotional. And what's the trigger? And then what do you want to happen? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And I think oftentimes, people will say, I want to go to one of my children's house. Well, chances are you need skilled care. And so it's not an option, right? So what they want, and so they just, and it makes everybody miserable because there was no plan. And do you have any advice on how to broach that subject?
Absolutely. That's a huge step. But part of the reason that many people, even though they know that they need to downsize, they know they need to kind of move to a different place, sometimes part of the problem is all their stuff that they have. They've got the stuff and they don't know what to do with the stuff, and they don't want to get rid of the stuff. We're kind of attached to our possessions sometimes. And I think that having a good discussion about that early on with your family member, with your parent or your family member that's going through that, to get that it is just stuff, finding a plan for that is very, very important. And I also think it's important to we are starting, for instance, in our church, we're starting a program that I'm helping to participate in to really help with that. We're talking to people about when is the time, when do we need to move forward? When do we need to downsize? When do we need to move into a place? Because of my husband, because he passed on first, we had already moved into a little condo with one floor so that when he was on oxygen, he could go wherever he wanted to and keep his oxygen on and not have to move the machine around. And it was just so much easier taking care of him and for him taking care of himself in this small condo rather than in our big house with lots of steps, right? So we were able to do that early on, which was very helpful. But one thing that happens, and I'm a widow, and I work with a lot of widows. I have a couple of widow books out as well to help with widows. One of the problems is when their husband dies, and they had, and in the past, the husband kind of was in charge of moving things and organizing things in some respects. When he dies, they kind of are frozen. And I really find that many widows for a while are just kind of frozen in their homes because they just don't know what to do. And through their grief and all the things that you go through, it's like they just don't know what to do. They just can't move. And I think that we have groups, we have grief groups together that we kind of help each other realize that, okay, it's time to, get rid of all the stuff and it's time to do these things. Sometimes it's the peers that are actually more helpful than the kids, because as a peer, I'm talking to them from, I know what it is. It's hard to downsize. I had to do it myself, but here's a way you can, move that along, or it's time to start looking. And sometimes my advice to them is just go sell the house and then you have to do it. I mean, sometimes you just go, they're, well, I have to get rid of this. It just goes, get the house sold. And then, then you'll have to find a way to get rid of it because there's going to be a deadline. But it is a huge problem. And I really do believe that much of that problem is associated with the stuff that we have and learning how to shed our stuff and move forward and not worry about our possessions. It's very freeing. I found it very freeing for me to have fewer things because I don't have to take care of anything anymore, which is fabulous. And so if we can bring those positive aspects, that is helpful. Another thing is that we are afraid to admit that I'm 68 years old. I'm happy to be 68. I'll tell everyone I'm 68. It's not a problem for me. I'm proud to be 68. But many of my friends don't like to admit their age, or they don't like to admit that they're getting older. And we need to, as a society, kind of deal with that and manage that. And I think sometimes the peers are in better shape than the kids because, it's a different group. They understand us a little more.
Yeah, I think aging is a little tricky because if I don't have a mirror nearby, I don't I don't feel old when I walk by the mirror and like, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I am. I need to start making some of these decisions, and but we don't feel a whole lot different than we did when we were young.
Not in our heads. I just got a new hip, so I'm feeling better now. But before that, I was feel pretty
Yeah.
bad. The thing wasn't moving. But we don't in our heads. That is the strangest thing, isn't it? Because in our heads, I'm like 25 years old, but the body isn't moving like way it used to, and it's not going where it should, and it's hurting. So it's a tough thing. Aging is a tough thing, and remember, we are living longer in frailty because before in previous generations we just kicked the bucket at 65 or 66. We didn't live that long. 45 earlier on, they didn't have all these problems of aging because they died sooner. But now that we're taking care of cancer, we're taking care of heart disease better, that we die later. And unfortunately, the arthritis and all in the joints and all the things that are just deal with wear and tear of our bodies, they're still breaking down, which is causing us, some emotional issues as well. If you can't embrace your age, you become depressed about it. And I think, again, I work with a lot of widows. There's a lot of depression out there because we're not at the same stage we are. People are not dependent on us anymore. We wonder what our identity is. I'm going through a tough time because my grandchildren are turning 12 and 13 and they don't need me anymore. I mean, I used to walk in the door and they, yeah, and now it's like, okay, hi, Nana, and they get back to their tablets. So it's hard for me. I mean, that's a small thing, very small thing, but we're at the point where our identity is being challenged and our usefulness is being challenged. And we're going through all of those things. And of course, if you have a spouse that passed away, then the grief associated with that is a big thing. So it's tough. It's not for sissies, that's for sure. But I just would like to see us as a culture start to teach us how to embrace our age. And we're doing that. I mean, I have a friend down in the villages in Florida. They're having a great time down there. So it's, there are places where we are embracing our age. And I wish we would pass it along to more people because I think sometimes they end up, as you mentioned before, where they don't want to, don't move me. I want to just stay here. Well, Mom, you can't stay here because you're not well enough. Well, then you take care of me. Well, Mom, I can't take care of you because I have a job. I mean, that's a discussion going on among a lot of families.
Is there a good way to pull people together? Is there because you said, let's talk about the future. Does everybody assume we're going to talk about death when we're going to talk about the future?
Well, that is our future, isn't it? I'm between menopause and death. I finished, I'm through menopause and now I've got to get to death. That's my next step. I mean, what else is there for me? It's my next step. So we have to talk about it.
Yeah,
And,
but when you're bringing the family together, I mean, can't we be doing a picnic or let's go to dinner and we're going to talk about the future, but we're going to have fun.
Yeah, I recommend Mother's Day, one of the big holidays, where it's kind of a gift to you because the family, to tell you the truth, many family members are like, well, I'm not really sure, I want to talk about that. Although in my case, one daughter is really happy to talk about it and the other daughter's like, oh. But I think that it's so critically important to have a healthy discussion before you're sick. If you have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and then you call them in to talk about the future, that's a very somber meeting, right? Because your death is imminent. But if you can call them together while you're healthy and just say, let's talk about the future. These are my plans. This is what I want to do. And it really can be a very positive experience for the family because everyone can talk about their fears and their expectations. And especially if there's something, if there's like an elephant in the room, if there's something, my sister-in-law, for instance, has one of my nephews is drug dependent and very ill and has kind of isolated himself from the rest of the family. Well, she's feeling, well, I want to give every member an equal, whatever's left, divided up among, there's only 3 left now, divide them up among 3. And the other 2 are like, well, wait a minute, he's just going to use it for drugs. And so if you have a gathering and talk about it, maybe not you might not have the guy that's on drugs because he's a little violent. He might not get involved in that, but at least have the other 3 talk about it. They can come up with a plan. And at least they'll know what they're going to do. They'll say, we're going to
And aren't there many parents that want to control from beyond the grave, shall we say?
Yes, it's not a good idea. It's, you know, we can't, you know, we can do some things. We can put money in a trust, you know, at a certain age and that sort of thing. So there's some things we can do to control beyond the grave. But I think that we also have to a certain extent, trust, you know, I'm going to give half to you. For my kids, I'm giving half to you and half to you, and I'm setting up some little trust for the grandkids. I just have to trust that they're going to take care of it, which is a good thing. And also there are, if you wanted to donate to a charitable organization, they need to know about it, you know, so they know that that's going to happen.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that you have families where one person can jeopardize the rest, right, through liability lawsuits, right, or your desires to make sure that they don't end up on the street, and so you have to do things like for the benefit of, or separate trusts, so that if somebody does a lot of drinking and driving, that liability doesn't cross over and take everybody's inheritance. And you know, but it doesn't mean you have to cut them out. It means you need your lawyers to craft a plan that protects the other ones.
Yes.
But they're families get messy.
Yes.
That they do. Mary, might you have a question? That's your first time. I don't think maybe it's your first time.
Actually, it's my second time, and I really thank you for this invitation. I just happened to get an invite a few weeks ago, so I'm new to all of what's going on here. I was going to ask you kind of aside what your what nest egg builder is.
Oh, okay.
But,
I forgot to say, didn't I?
no, it's just that I'm new, and but this is so, I'm trying to like learn all the different phases of life and what affects us. And I just find this very, very useful. I don't really have any specific questions, but
Okay.
I find it very, very useful. And
So we show people and support those who are already on their way to building their nest, so they have a portfolio of, in our case, we like to work with commercial real estate. And the reason we're having this show and have someone on every week is because there are so many aspects of life. You could invest your money in real estate, but then what? What is that for? Why are you building that portfolio? What Kim's talked, and she used the word many times, legacy, 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 which is people that want to leave something for their children or to a charity or for whatever. And so we think that's a very important thing to discuss. And yeah, we're all going to die. So, but by bringing a subject up like that and having this kind of conversation, it helps people become more comfortable if they're asking questions and actually getting involved in the conversation, so that then you can take the conversation to your brothers and sisters. You're quite young, and I don't know if you have children or any of that, but that's part of life. There are cultures, even in our country, where when someone passes away, they set them up in a room in their home and the community comes by to say goodbye, right? It's like death is a part of life, and you need to see what death is about. Most of our society's like hiding it, which is why I think people are afraid. You can't hide death from people. Some people don't go out in a good way, and some people go out like wouldn't it be nice just not wake up one day? That would be just spectacular, but who knows? We don't know. So that's why it's so important to have a conversation. Like, nobody's got it's not scheduled on your calendar, if you know what I mean. And that's why it's important to talk about it, especially if you own anything. because if you don't have a will set up, or you don't have a trust, which is even better, you don't have an insurance policy, it's what are people going to do? They don't know what to do. Just makes it more difficult. Which brought up one more thing that, Kim, you didn't talk about. And I know that in California, I'm in the Pasadena area, there's a couple of companies that will come in and move all your stuff for you because they know how attached you are to it. And I actually, a gal right down the street from me, she goes in and she cleans people's places out for them. They have to move, and she just goes in and she puts stuff out on the street and calls Salvation Army or whoever, and they come pick everything up. So
Yes, and I mentioned I put money in my will to
Yep.
have that under the shedding part. So I use those companies. I actually have already used one. I have one already in mind when we were cleaning out that shed that, I wasn't supposed to die until I cleaned the shed out, right? So we went, I sold, that's what they told me. So I sold the cabin, and it was, we had a lot of stuff. And what I did is I was in Kansas City with my other grandchildren, and there was a group that came into my cabin. They stayed there a couple of days. They moved everything out into pods. They got rid of all the gardening stuff that requires special disposal. They got a trash thing out there, and I gave them permission. I said, if something looks like you wouldn't want it, just toss it, because I didn't even know it was out in that garage, right? And they did, and they put it into pods. And I've been paying for the pods. And so, like, paying for storage where, you have your stuff that you don't even know what it is and you're paying for it is kind of silly. But I'm bringing the pods out next month to my daughter's home, and we're unloading them. We're calling all the family to come and take whatever they want. And then we're going to have the Salvation Army come and take it. And that company is doing it all for me. They're having the movers come to move the stuff that my kids want. And they're taking care of the Salvation Army and everything. So basically, I hired a company to do all the work, but it does, they're not cheap, but they were absolutely worth it, because that was such a fear. And they're worth it for people that are holding on to their stuff, that are in their homes, that need to downsize. By knowing these companies exist, those companies can come in and do all that work, and they can just move forward. It's a great service.
that is a great service. Do you have them posted on your website so people can just call them?
You know what? I should do that. I will do that.
That would
in
be
the book, I have the book out, and I have a QR code for them in my book under the shedding chapter. So I have a book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, that goes through all of these things. And we have a code for that particular company, but we also have resources under each chapter so that people can look things up and find things on their own. And it has all the first part talks about building legacy. The second part talks about death and dying. And the last part is a checklist of all the things you need to do before you go. So it's like everything you need to know before you go is in the book. And that's where I got interested, and I become a death doula. That's where I become interested in this topic.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, but before we go, David, you almost always have a question. So do you have a question today before we go?
I'm just curious what this thank you so much for this presentation today. So I'm just curious, what is your title? I mean, are you a life? I don't know. I just want to know what exactly.
Well, I've been around the block quite a bit in life, but the reason I got interested, I'm a death doula. I actually I'm certified as a grief. I was certified as a grief counselor. I'm a certified death doula, and I'm a civil mediator. But I was a dentist until I had nerve damage in my drilling fingers, which put me out of commission for that. And so I just had to redefine and do these other things. But the reason I started in this particular topic, and I never would have guessed, 5 years ago that I would be doing this, is when my husband died. I lost my son, lost my husband. When my husband died in particular, I looked around and saw the grief and the sadness, around that death. I think when my son died, I was just too shattered to notice anything. And when he died, I got to see that, and I thought, nobody was prepared. I knew he almost died every year for about 13 years. He had a lot of illnesses. So I knew that was coming, but everybody was in denial. And so I thought, what do we need to do? We need to be trained because we don't get trained for this. I looked ahead, I'm next to go, I'm the next one to die, right? So I want to make sure I'm prepared to, graduate from life with honors. And so I wrote this book, which I think will get me, along the way to do that. I wrote this book to help people navigate that part of their lives and to come to terms with death and to come to terms with the fact that we need to do this and to prepare our families so that when we go, they are far better prepared than if we hadn't done anything than typically. So that was my purpose for writing the book and focusing on this and becoming a death doula. Is really just to help. I'm a baby boomer and I failed retirement, by the way, from dentistry. I have to be busy with something, right? I probably, I'd probably be stalking my grandchildren. So then my kids would get a restraining order. It would be a mess. So this is what I just feel this is my calling and to help people because we are not educated in this area at all. And it's something that people need. And so it's been really a fun time for me to work in this area, whole new area, whole new area for me, but one that we need to focus on because it's going to happen to all of us.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
David, for that question. That was a great question. So she's a death doula. And Kim, thank you very much for coming today. It's just been wonderful learning all about this. And you're right, we need to discuss it more. So we'd love to have you come back again sometime.
Great. I'd love to come back. Thank you so much for having me.